What's up, sports history fan? Dana Augusta here of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. Ever wish you can get behind the scenes access to the Hockey Hall of Fame and dive into the untold stories that shaped the game? Then you need to check out Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories Part 2 by Eric Zweig. Eric's latest book is packed with wild, unexpected tales from epic rivalries and game-changing moments to quirky incidents like polo injuries and snowblower mishaps. Eric Zweig's impeccable research and passion for the sport of hockey will whisk you through the NHL's early years, the origins of the Three Stars tradition, and how hockey first hit the airwaves. Plus, you get fresh takes on legends like Wayne Gretzky, Bobby Hall, and Joe Sakic. Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2 is available now wherever you get your books. Grab your copy and get ready to dive deep into the heart of the game.
Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
All right. Hello, old sports, and welcome to another episode of the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. I'm Dan Newman. I'm your co-host, as usual, flying solo a little bit tonight, although not really, because I have a guest that I'll introduce in a moment. But Andrew was not able to make it on with us, and he wanted to make sure everybody knew that this was not because of the topic. As a sworn Celtics hater, he legitimately could not make it. But I am very honored tonight to be joined by Chad Finn, who's a sports and media columnist at the Boston Globe. He's worked there for over 20 years. He's been there since 2003. He authored the Boston Globe story of the Red Sox in 2023. He's won multiple Associated Press Sports Editor National Awards. And in 2020, 21, and 2022, he was voted favorite sports writer in Boston in the Channel Media Market Survey. He is here to talk about the Boston Globe story of the Celtics, just came out a couple of days ago and available wherever you get your books. 1946 to the present. It's the acclaimed story, the inside stories and acclaimed reporting on the NBA's banner franchise. And Chad, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on Hello Old Sports.
Hey, you bet, Dan. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
No, glad to do it. It's perfectly timed, not only with the book coming out, but with the NBA season just about to get started in just about a week. In fact, I think the Celtics open up a week from tonight on the 22nd against my beloved and very much revamped New York Knicks. So why don't we just kind of give us tell us a little bit about the book, because it's not a narrative history so much as it is really sort of a celebration of two Boston institutions, not just the Celtics, but the Globe sports page. So tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, it's a nice way of putting it. It's a compilation of the Globe's coverage of the Celtics through their history. And the Celtics, the Globe has been around for almost 100 years longer than the Celtics have, believe it or not. So we were there from the beginning, as we were. You mentioned the Red Sox book that I did in 2023. They started in 1901, and the Globe had 45 years of history to that point, something like that. So you're there from the beginning, but you're kind of wondering, what was the coverage like? Was the writing of a high quality? Were they there for every big event? That sort of thing. And in both cases, with the Red Sox and now this new book out now, the Celtics, which is a smaller time period, the Globe was there for all of it. Red Auerbach's arrival, but Bob Cousy coming here against Red's wishes, and then coming here, Russell, and through all those eras, the golden age with Bird and the Big Three, and with both books, you kind of start by just putting together a long, detailed list chronologically of everything you want in there, and you use all your resources. Basketball Reference, Wikipedia, Celtics history books, everything to get that complete list of all these meaningful moments that happened in Celtics history. And as was the case with the Red Sox book, we had them all. We covered everything. Some things, it's funny, some things like were covered sort of in passing or might not have been acknowledged to the degree in the time that they are now looking back on them. Like a ancient example is the Celtics had the first all black starting lineup, which wasn't even addressed in the very short game story, but you see it in the box score if you recognize the names of the players. A more contemporary example is Reggie Lewis notably blocked Michael Jordan 4 times in a game, which didn't happen to Michael Jordan. And that was sort of mentioned in passing. It was like Lewis, yeah, it had some really nice quotes in there from Jordan talking about Reggie Lewis, but it didn't. You look back on that now, Reggie having passed away in 1993 and him being kind of a sad, tragic what if in Celtics history, of which they've had a couple. You look back at it now and say, holy cow, he blocked Michael Jordan 4 times. But back at the time, it wasn't something that was really magnified, emphasized that much.
And I have to say, I remember that day with Reggie Lewis like it was yesterday. I was 10 years old, and I had my best friend. I grew up in New York, but my best friend was a Celtics fan. And so, very interested in the Celtics. And it was, like you said, 93. And there was the whole thing where he had passed out during the playoff game and then had tried to come back. And it wasn't really clear what was going on. And I think it was either during the finals or shortly thereafter. It was early, in June, if I'm remembering correctly, that this whole thing took place.
Yeah, June 27th, 1993, he was shooting over at Brandeis University, just shooting around, small school here in Boston, and collapsed and died on cardiac arrests. You go back and watch footage from that, from like the TV reports, and they were so matter of fact about it. It was the doctor comes in and all the media is gathered and it's chaos, and she just bang, bang, bang. Reggie Lewis died at such and such a time, and it was stunning. It takes the blood out of your face, even when something like that happens. And it had happened here twice. At least with Reggie Lewis, we got to know him. He was first round pick in 1987. Team captain. He was going to be the bridge after the Bird McHale Parrish years. I think his career probably would have paralleled Reggie Miller's a lot. They were in the same draft class, not the exact same type of player, but they kind of started to ascend at the same time. And he would have been a competitor in the mid 90s for those Jordan Bulls teams. And Indiana was there a little bit. The Knicks were there a little bit, teams like that. But Celtics history would have been different. Of course, the other example is Len Bias, who people reminisce about like he would have been Jordan, and he was phenomenal. I remember him, and I remember being so excited when the Celtics got him because they were coming off the '86 championship, and you could argue he was the best player in the draft, even though Brad Daugherty went number one. He was certainly the most athletic player in the draft, and he would have allowed them to spell McHale and Bird. And he overdosed on cocaine less than 48 hours after he was drafted by the Celtics. And people look at that and think, oh, he would have been incredible. He would have been Dominique Wilkins or some player like that. And you hear Coach K, like say Jordan and Bias are two best players he coached against. So that kind of feeds into that. But you go back and look at that '86 draft, man, and the second round was better in a lot of ways than the first round because a lot of the first round guys ended up either having drug problems or alcohol problems or something else that kept them from reaching their potential. And we just don't know how it would have gone with Len Bias had he lived. Hey, he might have been phenomenal. Larry Bird was coming to rookie camp that year. He was planning to work out with Len Bias. He thought that highly of him. But, he also might have gone the way of William Bedford and Roy Tarpley and Chris Washburn. You just don't know.
Yeah. And it's eerie with bias too. And we actually did an episode on the podcast about we did like a look back of 1986 in sports. So we talked a lot about the bias stuff. And the thing that Andrew and I both really fixated on is it's really eerie with bias because you've got the picture. You know, you got the or not one picture, but one day of photographs of him with the bias jersey. And so it's like it's so weird because it's not a full abstraction. It's not just they drafted the guy. He actually came to town, did the press conference. You know, I don't know if he put on the jersey or held up the jersey, but it's like it's eerie. Hat. It's eerie. You got like the one day of Len Bias as a Celtic. So
I know, and it was so exciting too. It was because you just felt like it was going to continue. That '86 Celtics team, who around here we still think of him as the best team of all time because of the Walton factor coming off the bench. Adding Len Bias to that would have been extraordinary. And as it turned out, Celtics first round draft picks in 1986 and '87 both died.
Yeah, that is a good point. I'd never thought of it quite that way, but that's your future front court maybe of the next 8 to 9 years. And we'll probably jump all around here, but for my money, I agree that 85-86 Celtics team is probably still the best single season team of all time. Obviously for dynasties, there's other Celtics teams from the 60s, but also, the Lakers of that same time period won more, but it's really hard to beat for a single season of dominance that 85-86 Celtic team. I think they were something like 40-1 at home or something crazy like that. It was really just, and I, as somebody who's lived in Boston, both as a college student and then for a few years as an adult, that team really has a special place. The only other team I can maybe think in recent memory that I would compare it to would maybe be 67 with the Red Sox. But there's a couple of teams in every city that are special. You just mention the name to a fan and it evokes all these memories and conversation. And to me, the 86 Celtics, no matter what else happens in the history of Boston sports, will always be that.
Yeah, it's not really a debate here whether they're the greatest team of all time. You won't get an argument in New England. Mm-hmm. I think people would say that the factor in that puts them in that category is they had Bill Walton coming off the bench as a six-man who arguably one of the top 5 most talented centers ever to play. You can't call him one of the best centers to play because he was always hurt in his NBA career. That 86 season was a miracle because he stayed healthy. He got banged up in the finals. We didn't really know about it. But to that point, he was totally healthy and was the Bill Walton that was so magical with UCLA and with the Trailblazers with their 77 title. And for that one wonderful season, you got Bill Walton playing with Larry Bird, who's just these two basketball geniuses. And then Dennis Johnson was a basketball genius in his own way. And Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, Danny Ainge. And all things being equal, you take a team in its era, because that's all you can really do is take how good was this team in its era. You take the 86 Celtics and you can put them up against anybody, Bulls, Warriors, whoever, from their particular era. And beyond that, it was just beautiful basketball to watch too. They had fast breaks so the ball didn't touch the floor.
And I think they would have beaten the Lakers that year in 86. Lakers didn't make it. Lakers were kind of in a weird sort of disarray period. Some guys had retired and Lakers were kind of in a little bit of a weird transition period. That was the one time in basically the only time in the 80s that the Lakers didn't, other than 81, but that 81 and 86, the only time in the 80s that the Lakers don't make the finals. And so everybody always talks about, well, the Lakers won 2 and the Celtics won 1 in the head-to-head, but you got to believe that if the Lakers had actually made it there in 86, that the Celtics would have beaten them because they were just so unstoppable that year.
Celtics wanted them. I mean, you mentioned they were 40-1 at home. When I remember a couple of guys, Bird and McHale, and maybe Danny Ainge too, saying this because he was running the Celtics at the time. But when the Warriors won 73 and broke the Bulls record of 72, they all said, if we knew 70 wins was a big deal, we would have done it. It's just something they didn't think about. They could get complacent on the road once in a while. They would have. They'd have a game where, DJ decided he wasn't going to shoot or something like that. But when the stakes were down. I mean, probably the best that '86 team ever played was this run when they wiped out the Hawks in the playoffs, and they had a 36-6 third quarter where they
Jeez.
just wiped the floor with them. And that was a really good Hawks team. They never, they never could get over the hump because Eastern Conference was stacked. But even the Knicks, I mean, with the Bernard King Knicks and then Ewing, had some really interesting teams. But that Hawks team with Neek and Doc Rivers and Kevin Willis was really good, and the Celtics made them look like they were playing a different sport in '86.
Yeah, and Bird and Dominique had a couple of legendary head-to-head matchups in the course of all those playoff matchups as well. You're talking about all-stars and sort of, all the Hall of Famers on that '86 Celtics team. Let's talk a little bit about this book, because I was just so impressed. And I made a quick list here, of some of the sports writers and columnists that are featured in the book. Will McDonough, Bob Ryan, Lee Montville, Dan Shaughnessy, Jackie McMullen. I think I even saw Bud Collins in there once or twice, who everybody knows more as a tennis writer, but he's got a couple Celtics bylines. I mean, that is really, just looking here, and again, being somewhat familiar with Boston, I've read great books by almost every single one of these people. Talk a little bit about just the Globe, sports, basketball specifically in the Celtics, and what it was like to cull through all of this work of 75 years.
Yeah, well, I always tell people if I come around the '80s, I never would have had a chance of getting hired there. It's just the depth of talent, and yeah, of course, it was different then too, where it was the destination. The big new daily newspaper was the destination before, before ESPN really became that next logical step. And there are other ways sports, some sports writers can went into sports radio or TV, but, Will McDonough was the one who opened the gates with that, becoming the guy, the information guy on NBC's, Sunday football, pregame. And that opened a lot of doors. But, one of the things I tried to do with the book was get writers in it that you might be surprised are there. And Will would be one because he's associated with the NFL. You mentioned Bud. Bud was a columnist at the Globe, wrote a ton about the Red Sox, like in '67. Getting in a story from him there. And I actually think Will is one of the best stories in the book, which is Larry Bird's retirement. And he rode to and from the Garden with Brett Auerbach and Larry in the car. So he had the real first person story about what it was like. But yeah, the Globe, the hardest thing about this book, I tell everybody this, the hardest thing about this book was particularly in the '80s heyday of the Celtics and the Big Three, but also the pinnacle of the quality of writing at the paper with Bob Ryan, Montville, who I think Globe writers would tell you is the best columnist the Globe ever had. He was a stylist that you could not imitate. Jackie McMullen a little bit later, Ian Thompson, John Powers, who's like the czar of the Olympics, and covered the Celtics for a long time, and a whole bunch of names. And the hardest thing was deciding when a couple of those people wrote on the same subject, which story to use, because they were both or all three would be phenomenal. So what ended up happening was the '80s chapter, probably partially because of my own biases. I grew up then.
Yeah.
Because of the importance of that team, how much that team still means to people around here, the Bird era, and the caliber of the writing about that team. That chapter is almost twice as long as any other in the book.
Yeah, I just finished a couple months ago reading Montville's book about covering the '69 finals as a young reporter. And he's got all of his articles in there and just kind of tells a story. Lee Montville, not that the others aren't, but Lee Montville's just such a great writer. His Babe Ruth biography is one of the best sports books I've ever read. He wrote a book about Dale Earnhardt, which I'm the furthest thing from a NASCAR fan, but I picked it up and read it just because I knew he would do the topic good. And then obviously some of the others are just incredible. Talking a little bit about the Celtics, obviously you separate it into eras in the book. And I want to maybe ask you about a couple of these eras because, and maybe some of the lesser one known. Tell me talk a little bit about the early years of the Celtics. What were the Celtics like sort of in the, not just the pre-Russell days, but the pre-Auerbach days? Because they didn't start to win for about 10 years, but there's a lot of history there too before they start winning in the 50s.
Yeah, Walter Brown brought the Celtics to Boston. He was their founder. He was a very positive, well-liked person in the community, but there are a couple stories about him getting really frustrated because nobody gave a damn about the Celtics in their early years. It was a hockey town.
Mm-hmm.
People are into like the ice capades and all these other events, and the Celtics were a real afterthought. They weren't good their first couple of years. Red came here the year before Red got here. They won 22 games, so they had the first pick in the draft, and Red had zero interest in Bob Cousy, who was the local star. He played at Holy Cross in Worcester, dazzling superstar when college basketball was far bigger than professional basketball. And he didn't want him. He thought he was too small, wasn't going to translate to NBA. And they ended up with Cousy in a dispersal draft when the Chicago Stags folded. And he was the last player available at dispersal draft. They took him, and he ends up being Bob Cousy, the first great NBA player, really, the first superstar guard, and defined how the point guard positions played. And I think that goes to show, especially in the early years, that you can be as smart as Red Auerbach was, and you can make the argument very easily that he's the greatest executive in professional sports history in the United States. You also have to have a little bit of luck. You got to have some breaks. And their first big break was getting Bob Cousy when they didn't really want him, even though he was in their backyard, and then having him turn the franchise into a good one before Bill Russell came here in 1956 and turned it into a historic one.
Were they decent in those early years? Obviously, they weren't winning championships, but were they a playoff team, or were they sort of perennial? You said the year before they were not good, but did they have any moments where they were, in contention? It was a much smaller league in those days, but what was were they sort of bottom of the barrel, or where were they in the league during those years?
Yeah, they weren't good. They had a coach named Alvin Dougie Julian, who came from Holy Cross. Mm-hmm. Apparently, Holy Cross was the basketball feeder then, and of course, Tom Heinsohn came from there later. And they weren't a good team, which is how Red ended up here. Red had been in Washington initially, and Walter Brown asked around about, who's a good basketball mind. We really need one because this isn't working. We're not drawing fans. I'm kind of starting to think this is going to fail. And he said every basketball person that he talked to recommended Red Auerbach. So that's how he ended up here. And then, Coos gets here. They hit the jackpot in 56 with getting Russell, Tom Heinsohn in the regional draft from Holy Cross. And then they also got Casey Jones, who was Russell's college teammate at San Francisco, is a great defensive guard. Wasn't a scorer, but just a lockdown defender, kind of Marcus Smart of his time. And that's when they went on their way. But those early years, they were bleak. You didn't know if they were going to last, let alone become a successful franchise.
What was the reception like in the city at the beginning, but also once they started to win? And, obviously, first and foremost, the big thing you think of is Boston was always a hockey town, Bruins going back. And then you hate to say it, but there was probably a racial angle to a lot of this stuff, too, with such a heavily black sport, a heavily black team, heavily black league. 1959, 1960, 61. Are the Celtics a hot ticket in Boston, or is it kind of a little bit of indifference?
I wouldn't go as far as saying indifference, but it certainly was not the priority, not compared to the Bruins. It was a hockey town. Mm-hmm. Walter Brown understood that it was a hockey town early on and kind of wanted to leverage that into it becoming also a basketball town. The racial aspect was certainly real, and I was relieved to find that the Globe did cover some of the incidents that Russell had to deal with, especially on the road, not necessarily ones that happened in Boston that you've heard about in later years, mm-hmm. but that Russell wrote about or talked about, later in his playing career, but things that happened elsewhere where players wouldn't be served in restaurants in the South and things like that. The Globe did write about those things. The aspect of maybe not catching on because it was perceived as a black sport in a town that was looked at, a northeastern town looked at as mostly white and had its racial issues of its own. It was definitely legitimate, and I don't think the Celtics became wildly popular even through the Russell dynasty until Bird and Magic joined the NBA, where they lifted every boat up when they came in the league. Everybody knew them from the Indiana State, Michigan State final, the most watched college basketball game of all time and always will be.
Yeah.
And they come in the league, East Coast, West Coast, Lakers, Celtics, different styles, LA, Boston, and it just elevated the whole league. And then with Larry and then McHale and Parrish and that group, the Celtics really took over the city then. But I don't know if people would say that happened at any point in the 60s with Russell, in part because Bobby Orr gets here in the mid 60s, and the big bad Bruins had an effect on Boston and New England that's still evident today whenever you drive down Route 1 and see a hockey arena. That was because people fell in love with hockey because of Bobby Orr, and that was what people were swept up in those days more than the Celtics.
I was going to ask this towards the end, but I think it makes sense to bring it up now. Where would you, because I talk about this, my wife and I talk about this sometimes, where would you put them in the city now? Like, and maybe there's not a definitive 1, 2, 3, 4 ranking, but obviously the Patriots forever were 4. And then they won. And in fact, they won my freshman year of college, my first year at BU, they won. And then they just sort of never stopped winning. But then a few years later, the Red Sox broke the curse. Celtics were a little bit in the dark years, but then, they've been better. They just won a championship. So again, I know maybe not looking for you to say here's 1, 2, 3, 4, but like, just generally speaking, where would you say they are in sort of the mind of the Boston sports fan these days?
Yeah, that's a great question because they're hanging a banner in a week, and I would say their popularity right now is as wide ranging in New England as it has ever been. I mean, when they had the parade in June for the championship team, it was eye-opening in all the great ways because it was incredibly diverse. Al Horford mentioned this, and some of the other players. It felt like everybody in the city from every demographic was there, and it was really cool. And it didn't used to be that way.
Yeah.
And so I'd say just in that broader sense, they're probably more as popular as they've ever been. But if you look at something like TV ratings, the Bruins beat them last year, and local cable ratings beat them by about a point. Not a big gap, but people who haven't had the option of saying, I'm going to watch the Bruins or the Celtics, they watch the Bruins, even though the Celtics pretty clearly had a chance to have a special season. Now, the Bruins were great the year before, before falling apart in the playoffs. So they had some, buzz coming into the year for sure last year. But I think if you followed the NBA and looked at what they did before last year, getting Drew Holiday, getting Porzingis, it felt like the missing pieces to the team that they couldn't get over the hump, and ended up proving to be true. And I would say now this year, I would expect the Celtics probably beat the Bruins in television ratings, and they're both a little bit ahead of the Red Sox. I just saw this year's Red Sox numbers on the regional network Nesson here, and the Bruins and Celtics did better than the Red Sox last year. So if we're just going in pecking order right now, I think the Celtics are probably gonna be first this year, but it's going to be fleeting because that is only because the Red Sox are way down. They stink. People are frustrated with them. They don't spend money on high-end players anymore. And the Patriots are in a phase where a generation of their fans have no idea how to deal with this because they grew up with, like you said, your freshman year at BU. If you're 28 years old right now, well, they won that Super Bowl when you were what? 5, 4. So you know nothing but Tom Brady and Bill Belichick until these last couple of years, and it's an adjustment. The people got really used to them being in the AFC Championship game every year, and then deciding if their season was success or failure from there, if whether or not you won the Super Bowl. So. I think Patriots fans here and Boston fans in general are just kind of getting acclimated to this new world. And you know, they're going to put Drake May on a pedestal because he looked really good in his first start, but it's a long rebuild for them. And I think they fall off. So I think, long answer, I think the Celtics are going to be number one this year, but it's not something they sustain because they just never really have been able to do it.
I say this occasionally on the podcast, and my brother, who's a huge New York fan like I am, gets frustrated with me, and I don't say this to be to kiss up to you or my wife or anybody else, but the reason why I think Boston is the best sports town in America is that you have a team in every major sport, but you have only one, so there's no split loyalties there. And there's been a reason, at least, you know, since the Patriots got good, there's a real passionate fan base for every single team. So it's just like you really just can't beat it. Every team has their own unique identity. It really is just a perfect, and I'm not telling you anything, obviously, but it's just really almost a perfect town to be a sports fan in.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you think it's all the same people, right? Like, yeah, this guy's a Bruins fan, Celtics fan too, but the crowds are a little different.
Yeah.
Like a Bruins game has a little bit more of an edge to it, I think. It's probably maybe a little bit more of a working class crowd.
That's hockey.
Ticket prices are nuts. I mean, it's expensive to go to a Bruins game. It's expensive to go to everything, but Bruins game and Celtics games at the Garden are you got to take out a mortgage generally.
My mother-in-law is a season ticket holder, so yeah.
Oh, nice. To the Bruins?
No, to the Celtics. She's been a Celtics season ticket fan holder since like 78 or something crazy like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
she's seen some things.
She has, yeah.
Yeah, it's I saw tickets for a week for the banner raising here next week. They're like $750 on the sites. So it's gonna be hard to get in for that. But when I was growing up, I mean, I never saw Bird play in person because it was really hard to get tickets, and it was also pretty expensive for the time. So maybe that hasn't changed that much. It's just that it's exponentially more costly now to be able to go to any of these things.
Yeah, no, that's true. Before I let you go, I want to ask you a couple questions about sort of other than editing the whole thing. I want to ask you a couple questions about your specific contributions to the book. You did an oral history of Larry Bird's 60-point game, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, that was it's my favorite thing I've ever done, probably. And not just work, maybe my entire life. It was something I started thinking about because it was the anniversary. It came out in 2015, so it was the 30-year anniversary of him dropping 60 on the Hawks in New Orleans, a day after running a 5K for the heck of it. And the Hawks players famously fell off the end of the bench, just blown away, laughing by what Bird was doing to him. So a really memorable game. So I figured I would track down as many people as I could and talk to them about it. And I think you ask any reporter, or especially somebody like a Jeff Pearlman type who writes these really well-researched books, a lot of times it's the people who maybe weren't the biggest names, but that weren't the biggest names that have the best memories because it might have meant more to them. It wasn't common to them. So I called everybody and talked to everybody, and it was cool because most of those guys are at the point in their lives where they're happy to talk about that stuff. They're willing to reminisce, like Scott Wedman, who was he was a great shooting forward for the Celtics. He'd been an all-star for the Kings. And it was like the seventh man on that great 86 team. And I called him. He was selling insurance in Kansas City and just happy to talk about it, and told me about how Larry would run him off the court in practice and how competitive they were and stuff like that. And So it's thrilling to talk to all those people, and I got all the Hawks guys too. Dominic Wilkins called me back, and was fantastic. And the one I needed was Bird, which of course was going to be the hard one.
Oh, yeah.
It was Larry Bird, and he's kind of not reclusive because he does do things, but he can be hit or miss. And even with people like Jackie McMullen, Barb Ryan, with long relationships with him, he goes through ebbs and flows where he talks to them. And so I called the Pacers, sent a message to the Pacers PR guy. I never heard back. And I was like, it's not going to happen. I'm going to have to like take quotes out of Bird's biography talking about the game. They wrote Bob Ryan and, attribute those. And I was getting all ready to do that. Told me, I don't think I'm ever going to get him. And I got home from jury duty one day. And my phone rings, and I see it's an Indianapolis number, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, it's the PR guy. Sandberg can't do it." I pick it up, and you hear that drawl that's really familiar around here.
Unmistakable, yeah.
Yes, and he just says, "Chad, Larry Bird, what do you need?" And I said, "Let me get my notebook, Larry. Hang on 1 second." I texted my wife. Larry Bird just called me back, and then he was fantastic and told me all kinds of things about it. And he gave me my ending to the piece, which was, "Yeah, that game was great, but if you really want to talk about a great game I played, there's this one in Utah once." And just opening that door. I should have called him back sometime about that Utah game, but I never did.
And I, as a Yankee fan, I especially enjoyed that article because you also got John Sterling, which people don't realize that. I remember the first time I saw that game on ESPN Classic in like 1980. Well, no, not in like the mid 90s on ESPN Classic. Right in the heart of the Yankee dynasty, and I was like, "Is that John Sterling calling the Hawks Celtics game?" But yeah, he had that whole other history as a Hawks and Braves broadcaster in Atlanta in the 80s. So that's always kind of cool that in addition to all the Yankees stuff, you always hear him whenever anybody talks about that game. John Sterling is one of the people that they interview, of all people.
He was so nice too. And I hated John Sterling. Like when I could actually be a Red Sox fan, at 2000, the late 90s when the Yankees knocked him out of the playoffs in 99. And then, 2003 there in Boone, heartbreak and all that. And then finally 2004, which was right when I came to the Globe. But I was like, the Yankees win. I just wanted to drive my car off the road every time I heard that. And so I call him to talk to this, and he's the nicest guy in the world. He's just so nice. He's like, "Send me copies of the story, please. And, anything else I can think of, I'll let you know." And he did. He called me back with something else, and couldn't have been more impressed with him, which, ran against my feelings for him as a Red Sox fan growing up.
And then you also did the obituary for Tommy Heinsohn, right?
I did. Yeah, I wrote the media version because we did a couple of different things on his 3 different basketball lives. Really, we did no bid on just the big, who Tommy Heinsohn was. John Powers did that, and then I did the media one, and then we did one on his coaching career too, because the overlooked era in Celtics history is the 70s, where they won titles in 74 and 76, and nobody thinks of them because it's sandwiched in between Russell and Berg. And so we did a lot when Tommy passed away. We knew it was coming. We had heard that he wasn't doing very well, and he'd been in the hospital for a while. And that was an honor for me. I mean, I imagine being a New York fan, that they're just broadcasters that you love and that you've grown up with and mean a lot to you.
John Sterling.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, for me, I mean, it was Mike Gorman, who retired after last season, Tommy Heinsohn. They called the Celtics games for over 40 years. And so, my Facebook profile picture for like the last 10 years is me interviewing Tommy before a game where we just went over his entire career basically. And I did like a long Q&A with him. It was just like a personal highlight for me in my job. And so, yeah, it was an honor to write about Tommy when he passed away, as sad as it was. I felt really fortunate to be able to try to pay homage to him.
And a much more well-rounded guy than people might realize. He was a painter, right? And just kind of a really sort of, in a weird way, almost like an intellectual type of guy for somebody who you think of as just yelling at the referees on the side of during a broadcast. So really just one of those guys. And it is really kind of sad that so many of those guys from that dynasty have passed away in the last 3 or 4 years. Russell, both Joneses, Heinsohn, obviously. So it's really sort of, it's kind of like what you've seen with the Lombardi Packers from around the same time period. It's just a
Yeah.
lot of guys who've passed away, and I mean, Kuzi's still around, but you're kind of losing that link to these great dynasties of mid-century.
Yeah. I mean, and one of the great things about the Celtics of recent eras, that the really good teams they've had, whether it was the Garnett, Pierce, Allen teams or the ones now, was an appreciation of that history from the players. Garnett's got an edge to him, and he's not a guy who gets intimidated. And he was like a little kid with Bill Russell. I mean, Bill Russell was a hero to Kevin Garnett, and I think probably a big reason he decided he was going to come to the Celtics when McHale traded for him, traded him here to Ainge, his old teammate, but Garnett wanted to go to Phoenix or Los Angeles. You kind of had to be convinced to come here, and the Bill Russell factor and the Celtics history factor was a big part of that. And now you look, and Garnett's number's retired here. It's not retired in Minnesota for some reason.
It's strange.
Yeah, it does. It stinks when you lose those threads, whether you're Celtics, Yankees, and Red Sox or whatever it happens to be, where it's a franchise with enviable tradition. And those legends start passing away. It's hard to take.
Last question, this one you probably have gotten at some point. You did a Red Sox book, you did a Celtics book. Are there plans for the other two from the Globe and yourself, or are you just taking a deep breath at this point and don't want to think about that?
I'll do it if they ask me to. Honestly, I'd rather do a Patriots book, but the Bruins one has come up already.
Okay.
I don't know if they would ask me to do that. Maybe. I think they're pretty happy with these two, but
these are great. Yeah.
I'm not like that. I'm like a 3-sport guy.
I kind of am too. It's hard, it's hard to do. I always found it hard to do more than one, as one a season. It's, that's why I never even really got all that into college sports other than at the playoffs or the tournament or whatever. It's like, you got your one team and your one sport. And if you got 3 of those, then that's, that's a full meal. It feels like sometimes. So
yeah, you can always jump on the bandwagon too. I jumped heavily on the Bruins bandwagon when they had that record-winning season, regular season. They lasted 7 playoff games. But you can always do that as a Knicks fan with the Rangers if the Rangers look like they're winning the cup or something. Totally allowed.
I did that when I was 10 years old in 1994 because I thought they both were going to win, and then we don't need to talk about John Starks. But anyway, the book is the Boston Globe story of the Celtics, and the editor Chad Finn has been generous enough to join us here. And Chad, this was great. I really enjoyed it, and hope you all check out and enjoy the book. Thank you, Chad.
Hey, thank you too. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And that would be it for our interview with Chad Finn. I really enjoyed the interview, and thank you all for listening. I would again encourage each of you to check out the book. It is the Boston Globe celebration of the history of the Boston Celtics. I will place a link in the show notes. And until next time, this is Dan. Goodbye, old sports.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.